You ever initiate a standard morning security sweep of your private residential perimeter only to discover your property has been violently converted into an illegal, high-risk operational depot for your HOA? That's precisely how my entire sequence of ordered existence was catastrophically violated. I am not discussing a single misplaced component or a minor, localized infraction. Before we move forward, comment down from where you're watching and what time it is there right now. My peaceful, legally secured backyard had been unilaterally annexed and converted into a full-scale, unsanctioned commercial supply zone overnight. The inventory was immediate and alarming. Industrial-grade dimensional lumber, volatile flammable reservoirs of specialized paint solvents, and massive stacks of wooden pallets, all illegally staged in direct proximity to my dwelling. The immediate visual assessment indicated a complete, catastrophic failure of supply chain security. The critical intelligence gap was the perpetrator, a gap immediately filled when I observed the HOA President, Donovan, brazenly violating my property boundary, marching across the turf like she held the legal deed to the entire development. Donovan is not a typical civilian. She is a systemic predator. Late 50s, outfitted in an aggressive pastel uniform, her facial expression permanently locked into a state of contempt, her clipboard a physical, operational extension of her delusional authority. She deployed a dismissive, patronizing gesture, treating this act of flagrant, illegal trespass as a sanctioned community service event. "Good morning," she articulated, her voice saturated with the synthetic sweetness reserved for bureaucratic extortionists. "We are executing a temporary staging of non-regulated materials for the upcoming neighborhood infrastructure project. Temporary, of course." Temporary. That single word is the ultimate declaration of hostile intent in HOA governance. It translates directly to permanent annexation pending immediate, aggressive legal counteraction. I immediately transitioned into analytical mode, suppressing all emotional response. "Karen," I articulated, my voice a cold, measured vector of data. "You are aware this precise area is legally defined as my private, secured, and exclusive residential territory, correct?" "My dear, we are operating under a collective community mandate here," she countered, deploying her most condescending vocal pattern. "We are facilitating community enhancement. You should be grateful your available space is being deployed for a superior communal function." Grateful? She anticipated my compliance and gratitude after she had illegally compromised my security and violated my property rights, converting my backyard into a volatile, high-risk staging ground. My only rational response was immediate tactical data collection. I executed a continuous, high-resolution photographic and video sweep, securing dozens of data, points, all geotagged and time-stamped, immediately encrypted and backed up to a redundant cloud server. If the HOA board intended to initiate a legal skirmish, I was bringing the entire judicial code as ammunition. By the end of the day's operational cycle, the unauthorized staging footprint had nearly doubled. 2 additional board operatives arrived in non-sanctioned contractor vehicles, illegally deploying an even greater volume of supply, including drums of highly reactive, volatile compounds that were clearly hazardous. My security camera confirmed one operative carelessly staged these materials in the direct, sun-exposed path adjacent to my primary cooking element. My personal companion animal could no longer navigate the territory without acute risk of physical injury from unsecured timber and industrial sheeting. I initiated a high-stakes verbal confrontation with Karen, deliberately struggling to maintain emotional neutrality. "You cannot unilaterally stage classified, hazardous, and acutely flammable materials on my private, secured asset." She delivered a patronizing, pitying smile. Cease the manufactured drama. It is not classified as hazardous. It is sanctioned community supply, is it not? My legally defined backyard had, in her delusional paradigm, been recategorized as community property. By the subsequent Sunday morning, I had ceased monitoring the sheer volume of non-HOA vehicles illegally utilizing my private access route as a public loading terminal, a minimum of 6 or 7 unauthorized incursions. My primary access route now resembled a commercial transfer station. My neighbor, Tom, an asset I considered a reliable intelligence source, initiated contact, delivering an immediate status report. "Sir, I was unaware you had franchised a local retail construction supply unit." I returned the sarcasm. "Affirmative, I appear to be the freshly designated HOA Logistics and Inventory Director." Then, the subsequent Monday initiated the ultimate, catastrophic system trigger. An immediate, deliberate knock on my secure entrance. A uniformed individual in high-visibility safety gear stood there, carrying a professional clipboard. "Good day, sir," he stated. "I am the appointed agent from the HOA's commercial liability carrier, executing the mandated annual safety compliance audit." The HOA board had provided 0 prior notification for this inspection, but I authorized immediate, unescorted access. I personally led him to the exposed backyard staging area. The agent's physical reaction was immediate. He froze. His composure visibly deteriorated, as if he had just been exposed to an active, uncontained threat. He visually processed the illegal staging. Paint and solvent reservoirs stacked precariously, volatile fuel containers positioned next to the heating element, and a dangerous vertical mass of unsecured lumber pallets threatening immediate structural collapse onto the boundary fence. He initiated an immediate, aggressive data capture sequence, logging information at a frantic speed. "Sir," he queried, "is this entire, unsecured material payload HOA property?" I offered a concise, strategic confirmation. "That is the board's official assertion, and I can further confirm it is currently being warehoused on my sovereign private domain without a signed, executed release of liability." The agent articulated a single, definitive operational summary. Catastrophic, unmitigated liability exposure. He secured a high-volume photographic record and initiated an immediate exfiltration. Within 2 hours, my communication device registered a critical, high-priority contact. The number was unlisted. I initiated the connection. It was Karen, operating in a state of terminal, uncontained panic. "Did you provide a statement to the liability auditor?" she aggressively demanded. "Affirmative," I confirmed, my tone deliberately flat, a polite, highly professional individual. Her aggressive, synthetic control dissolved into sheer, raw panic. "You were explicitly unauthorized to grant him access to the area. That jurisdiction is confined exclusively to the HOA." I delivered a cold, single-vector response. Then the HOA should have refrained from utilizing my private jurisdiction as a logistics terminal. By the evening operational cycle, the neighborhood's information network had achieved absolute critical mass. Intelligence confirmed the commercial liability carrier had initiated an immediate policy suspension pending the internal review of the auditor's findings. Citizens were demanding immediate clarification on the illegal staging of hazardous components off-site. Others were already uploading photographic evidence of Karen's desperate, clandestine removal team attempting to physically drag lumber from my property under tactical flashlights. Tom transmitted definitive photographic proof with the caption, "Critical breach. HOA board flagrantly violates their own code. Full legal exposure imminent." I experienced a singular cold surge of satisfaction. Retribution had arrived early, armed with non-negotiable insurance law. I immediately understood this was not a localized dispute. The HOA had initiated contact with the ultimate financial predator, the commercial liability carrier, and the terminal exposure was about to exceed the total financial capacity of the entire board. Karen Donovan initiated this conflict, believing she was challenging a homeowner. She calculated the risk based on local bylaws and the standard civil fatigue rate. She saw a man operating a barbecue near some illegally staged solvents. She saw a pushover. Her failure was one of catastrophic intelligence gathering. I am Derek Vance, and her policy suspension was not an accident. It was a targeted, tactical strike. I didn't spend my career fighting petty fines. I spent my career dismantling multi-million-dollar corporations whose entire operational structure was built on systemic risk and liability fraud. For 15 years, I wasn't just an insurance adjuster, I was a senior corporate risk mitigation consultant. My expertise was the precise identification of the conditions that legally trigger the total nullification of a commercial liability policy, the catastrophic, unrecoverable breach of contract. I am a specialist in corporate vulnerabilities, and Karen Donovan had just handed me the master keys to the absolute financial incinerator of the Willowcrest HOA. The peace I sought in this neighborhood was not born of compliance, but of exhaustion. My operational tempo for 2 decades involved deep-dive forensic analysis into major corporate collapses. I routinely documented the fatal procedural errors that cost companies their entire solvency, resulting in executive arrests and criminal prosecution. I had seen massive, diversified syndicates go bankrupt overnight because they ignored a single critical safety exclusion clause. When I encountered Karen's illegal staging operation, I didn't see lumber. I saw a Class 3 flammable exclusion breach. I didn't see paint cans. I saw an unsecured commercial hazard on residential property, a condition that any standard D&O policy explicitly voids coverage for. My quiet life here was my deliberate retirement from perpetual crisis. I sought a zero-risk environment, and Karen Donovan, through sheer magnificent arrogance, had violently introduced a high-intensity, uninsured liability nexus directly onto my personal secured property. My entire background is built on the unwavering authority of documentation. My professional reputation was cemented by my ability to cite, verbatim, the specific policy writer, the state fire code, and the municipal ordinance that guaranteed a swift, unappealable legal outcome. I operate on data, not emotion. Karen had the emotional fury of a spoiled child. I possessed the cold, detached precision of an analyst prepared to execute a forensic audit. My first action upon realizing the scale of her illegal annexation was not to argue. It was to cross-reference her actions with the community's known insurance obligations. I knew, with absolute certainty, that no commercial liability carrier allows the unauthorized storage of commercial-grade, flammable construction materials on a residential unsecured site. It violates every principle of risk management and triggers an immediate, non-negotiable termination clause. The home I live in is a fortress of compliance. Every permit is filed. Every code is strictly adhered to. My financial records are immaculate. My property is a deliberate bastion of low risk, precisely because my entire life was spent documenting the chaotic self-destruction of others. This is why Karen's violation was so egregious. It didn't just threaten her. It unilaterally and illegally compromised the low-risk integrity of my own asset. She saw the quiet man who paid his dues. She missed the certified risk arbitrator whose professional judgment was worth millions. My personal history validates my commitment to accountability. My father, a career fire marshal, instilled in me the absolute, non-negotiable authority of safety codes. He was ruined professionally when a local political cabal forced him to sign off on a construction project that violated critical fire codes. The resulting disaster cost lives and obliterated his career. My subsequent commitment to risk mitigation became a matter of personal, unyielding integrity. When Karen staged those volatile compounds next to my gas grill, she didn't just create a liability. She committed a direct, actionable insult to my family legacy. When the insurance adjuster arrived, the agent of bureaucratic consequence, I knew precisely which language to deploy to guarantee the full scope of the disaster would be recorded. I didn't have to exaggerate. I didn't have to lie. I simply had to articulate the facts using the specialized terminology of liability exposure, unsecured Class 3 flammables, breach of the residential zoning covenant, proximate risk to adjacent structures. I spoke the cold, unfeeling language of the commercial policy, a dialect Karen could neither understand nor counter. Karen's subsequent panic was entirely predictable. She expected I would either confront her emotionally or quietly remove the items myself. She anticipated a civilian response. What she received was a surgical, technical report filed with her own carrier, ensuring an outcome that bypassed her authority entirely. I had initiated an unappealable regulatory sequence. The moment that liability auditor drove away with those photographs, the definitive evidence of a catastrophic breach, Karen Donovan's financial autonomy, and by extension, the entire HOA's solvency, was already terminated. She was still trying to manage a PR disaster. I was already calculating the final liquidation value of the HOA's assets. Her reign was over. She just didn't have the technical expertise to realize it yet. The moment Karen Donovan's voice shattered with panic over the phone, I knew the tactical analysis was complete. Her attempt to coerce me into lying for her insurance audit was the definitive proof. This wasn't a mistake. It was a deliberate, calculated risk taken by a tyrant operating outside the rule of law. My next move was to execute a forensic audit on her command structure. A bully like Karen never operates without a network of complicity and coercion, and I needed to map the exact pathways of her corruption before I launched the final devastating counterstrike. I immediately initiated a digital deep dive, accessing the public filings for the Willowcrest Homeowners Association. On paper, the structure was standard, a 5-member board, standard operating procedure. But the reality, as always, was a house of cards built on intimidation. Karen was the self-proclaimed supreme commander. I analyzed the voting records, and the pattern was horrifyingly clear. 2 board seats had been conveniently vacant for 3 years, allowing Karen to operate with a compliant 3-person quorum. 1 seat was held by a silent operative who never appeared to vote against her. The critical vulnerability was the treasurer, Arthur Pinter. My analysis of the community's meeting minutes showed Arthur was a perpetual state of nervous compliance. He was the fiduciary keyholder, the man responsible for the legal transfer of funds, yet he was clearly terrified of Karen's aggression. He was the weakest point in her operational perimeter, the asset I needed to secure. The entire motivation for this illegal staging, this massive liability breach on my private property, was immediately obvious upon reviewing the financials. Karen was avoiding the cost of a legitimate, insured, off-site commercial storage unit, a necessary expenditure that would have cost the HOA approximately $1,200 a month. To save a meager 4 figures, she chose to bypass the entire legal and safety protocol, exposing the entire community to multi-million-dollar uninsured risk. That is the definition of willful negligence driven by pathological greed. She didn't just break the rules, she committed a corporate-level breach of fiduciary duty to avoid an operating expense. I needed to secure the human element of her systemic abuse. I located a secondary target, another HOA victim, to validate her modus operandi. I found the file of Mrs. Helen Porter, a retired teacher known for her precise, beautiful rose garden. Karen had issued Mrs. Porter a staggering $5,000 fine for non-conforming soil enrichment, an invented violation that amounted to nothing more than using unapproved mulch. When Mrs. Porter, already on a fixed income, challenged the fine, Karen simply levied it, placing a non-judicial lien on Mrs. Porter's home until it was paid. The resolution? Mrs. Porter was forced to hire a specific, pre-approved vendor, a company I immediately flagged, to perform remediation work, costing her thousands more. This predatory pattern wasn't accidental. It was her entire system of governance. Karen didn't collect dues. She manufactured fines. She used the complexity of the covenants and the threat of aggressive litigation to enforce compliance and extract revenue. She was running a protection racket dressed up in pastel suits and clipboards. I confirmed she had successfully placed over a dozen such punitive liens on homes in the last 5 years, capitalizing on the fear and legal ignorance of the residents. Her power wasn't in her title. It was in her victims' absolute terror of the foreclosure process. My analysis of the physical evidence, the illegal staging site itself, solidified the sheer audacity of her risk profile. The inventory included not only highly flammable solvents, but also commercial roofing material and heavy machinery components. These items carried a higher-than-average risk factor, driving up the cost of commercial storage, the cost she was so desperate to avoid. By moving these Class A and B hazards onto my unsecured residential land, she took the ultimate gamble. That no fire, no spill, and no audit would ever expose her reckless, fraudulent operation. The evidence was overwhelming. A corporate structure corrupted by greed, a systematic pattern of extorting vulnerable residents, and now a catastrophic, uninsured liability exposure, all initiated by her own unilateral decision-making. I had the procedural violation, no board vote, the fiduciary breach, saving money at the cost of total policy loss, and the human element, the terrorized Arthur Pinter and the victimized Mrs. Porter. I had all the intelligence required to guarantee not only her removal, but her subsequent financial incineration. The beast was fully exposed, its vulnerabilities mapped, and I was about to deploy the one weapon Karen couldn't fight: the cold, unfeeling justice of commercial law. My analytical engine had finished the diagnostic phase. Now it was time for the tactical execution. Karen Donovan's frantic call demanding I lie for her was the final confirmation that she was operating in a state of terminal self-interest. I didn't need to argue with her. I needed to deploy an asset that was functionally deaf to her emotional histrionics and immune to her threats. I needed to call in the professionals. And those professionals were about to be triggered by the cold, precise language of a commercial insurance policy's mandatory risk disclosure. I didn't contact the general HOA claims line. I located the direct telephone number for the risk assessment and underwriting division of the HOA's commercial liability carrier. When the line connected, I didn't introduce myself as a homeowner. I introduced myself as Derek Vance, a concerned party, and deployed the highly specific technical lexicon that guarantees an immediate, high-priority site inspection. My language was sterile, focused, and terrifying. I reported the existence of an unsecured staging area for Class 3 flammable commercial solvents and uncertified construction-grade lumber on an adjacent private residential asset, citing the clear breach of the hazardous material exclusion rider within the general property and D&O liability master policy. I concluded with a chillingly specific warning. The conditions present constitute a high probability total policy nullification trigger and require immediate forensic assessment. The operative on the other end, hearing the precise policy language, instantly transitioned from clerical processing to crisis management. A site inspection was guaranteed within 4 hours. This sequence was critical. I didn't file a complaint. I filed a mandatory risk report, forcing the carrier to act to protect its own capital reserves. When the insurance adjuster arrived, a nervous, clipboard-carrying agent of corporate consequence, I personally escorted him to the backyard. I didn't need to utter a single emotional word. The visual evidence was overwhelming, and I let the sheer audacity of Karen's negligence speak the language of liability. The adjuster's face, meticulously recorded by my discreet, high-resolution surveillance system, transitioned into a look of sheer corporate terror. He was seeing thousands of dollars of premium income evaporate into thin air. He focused immediately on the volatile, unsanctioned staging, the proximity of the solvent drums to the boundary line, the complete lack of fire suppression apparatus, and the fact that the entire operation was conducted without a single permit on a residential lot. He executed a rapid, furious data collection. I didn't speak until he asked for the homeowner's position. I simply provided him with the time-stamped, geotagged photographic evidence of the inventory arriving, concluding with a precise statement. My property was unilaterally annexed for this operation without my signed authorization or a legally ratified board vote, making the entire staging operation uninsured and illegal from inception. The agent muttered terms like gross breach of warranty and Code 5 non-compliance trigger as he furiously snapped dozens of high-resolution photos. The adjuster confirmed to me, in technical policy language, that the presence of the Class 3 solvents and the commercial staging operation on an unsecured residential parcel was a zero-tolerance violation of the commercial policy's terms. He was professionally obligated to file a report that would recommend immediate policy cancellation. But the consequences didn't end with the insurance carrier. The agent, as I had predicted, was legally bound to report all observed municipal code violations, especially those related to fire and environmental safety, to the relevant government agencies. This meant the problem was immediately multiplying. Karen's unilateral greed had not only doomed the HOA's insurance, but had also activated the fire marshal's office and municipal environmental services. I had moved the conflict out of the petty jurisdiction of the HOA and into the crushing, non-negotiable jurisdiction of state and municipal enforcement. My phone rang within the hour. It was Karen, her voice vibrating with a high-pitched, desperate rage. "You betrayed the community. You were not supposed to let him in. You must call them back and tell them it was a misunderstanding." Her panic was a tangible victory. I calmly articulated the cold reality. "Karen, I merely spoke the truth, which is a mandated requirement of my private liability agreement. You were attempting to save the HOA $1,200. You have now triggered a total policy cancellation, a massive financial penalty from the city fire marshal, and guaranteed the personal liability exposure of every sitting board member. You have achieved total catastrophic operational failure for pocket change." I concluded the call with a final chilling observation. The documents are already filed. The process is now irreversible. That night, the Fight Intelligence Network, the neighborhood group chat, confirmed the catastrophic breach. The policy was not just suspended, it was moving toward total cancellation. The community's financial security had been destroyed by their own president's negligence. Photographic evidence of Karen's frantic, clandestine removal team operating under the cover of darkness, the midnight panic cleanup, flooded the chat. Her attempt to erase the evidence was too late. The high-resolution documentation was already secured in the insurance carrier's file. The next day, the consequence arrived in the physical form of a city fire marshal inspector and a municipal environmental agent. They were not polite. They moved with the cold authority of government compliance officers. They took measurements, logged evidence of solvent residue near the soil, and confirmed the massive violation of residential zoning codes. The city inspector confirmed my tactical assessment. The code violation penalty would be significant, a massive 5-figure fine, levied not against me, but against the Willowcrest HOA Board of Directors. Karen's arrogance had not only cost the HOA its security, but had generated an enormous self-inflicted tax. The process was now irreversible. Her reign was moving toward its final spectacular combustion. Karen Donovan was a cornered animal. My strategic deployment of the insurance auditor and the subsequent activation of the city fire marshal had shattered her composure, but not her absolute, toxic arrogance. She still believed she could control the narrative through sheer force of will, lying to the neighborhood and intimidating the remaining terrified board members. Her only move left was a desperate public spectacle, an emergency HOA meeting, to perform a damage control routine and, critically, levy a massive illegal fine against me to finance her legal defense. This was not a meeting. This was the scheduled location for her public execution. The policy cancellation hit the HOA with the force of a financial tsunami. The formal notice arrived: immediate and permanent policy termination, citing gross breach of warranty and risk exposure due to willful negligence. Without that commercial liability coverage, every single member of the board was now operating under personal, unlimited financial liability. No indemnity, no protection. Any injury sustained on common property, a slip and fall near the community pool, would land directly on their personal assets. The neighborhood intelligence network confirmed total chaos. Residents were demanding to know why their entire financial security had been illegally compromised to save Karen $1,200 in storage fees. The final piece of damning evidence arrived just hours before the scheduled assembly: the municipal code violation penalty. The fire marshal's office, confirming the solvent residue and the illegal zoning breach, slapped the HOA with a massive, unappealable fine of $15,000. This fine, levied due to the improper staging of Class 3 flammables and environmental risk on residential property, was the concrete proof of Karen's criminal negligence. The entire community was now on the hook for her personal, reckless greed. Karen, predictably, chose to escalate the confrontation. She tried to make me the villain. She sent out an emergency notice demanding the homeowners attend, claiming I had conspired with the insurance carrier and was an agent of community destruction. This was her last pathetic display of power, and I knew I had to be there to ensure her humiliation was absolute and final. I arrived at the community center, not as an angry resident, but as a detached observer holding an entire prosecution file. I positioned myself in the front row, holding my single locked briefcase that contained the unassailable documentation. Karen was already at the main table, her face a mask of strained composure. She was surrounded by the remaining, terrified board members, including a visibly shaking Arthur Pinter, the treasurer, whose face was pale with the realization of his personal financial exposure. Karen started immediately, launching into a furious, pre-written monologue, her voice tight with controlled venom. She used every rhetorical trick: victimhood, distraction, and outright fabrication. This so-called cancellation is a gross clerical error orchestrated by hostile individuals who seek to profit from community disruption, she shrieked. This man, she pointed directly at me, her eyes blazing with hatred, is attempting to extort our association. He manufactured this crisis. I didn't utter a word. I simply met her gaze with a cold, unwavering analytical focus. Her attempt to spin the narrative fell apart immediately when the resident started demanding proof. A neighbor from the back, a man who had been quiet for years, stood up. "Madam President," he projected loudly, "we have received intelligence regarding a $15,000 municipal fine. Is this fine real? And is it related to the illegal materials staged in Mr. Vance's yard?" Karen lost all control. Her entire facade crumbled. "That fine is under appeal. It is irrelevant. It is a witch hunt." But the word irrelevant in the face of a $15,000 penalty was her operational demise. The room immediately erupted into absolute chaos. They weren't asking. They were screaming. The critical tactical moment arrived when Arthur Pinter, the weak link in her chain of command, realized the total catastrophic danger. Karen attempted to move to her final motion. To counter this legal terrorism, the board has authorized a special emergency assessment of $200,000 for legal defense. Arthur Pinter finally broke. He pushed back his chair, his entire body trembling, but his voice, surprisingly, cut through the noise. "No, I refuse to authorize that vote. She is lying. The insurance cancellation is real, and we have zero coverage. The D&O policy is void." He turned to the entire room, his voice rising into a shout of sheer, terrified honesty. "She operated this entire scheme alone. She bypassed the vote to avoid the cost of legal storage. She has exposed every one of us to personal ruin." The admission was a tactical nuclear explosion. The entire community focused its collective, furious gaze on Karen Donovan. She tried to scream, to demand his silence, but her power was gone. She was just a woman in an ill-fitting suit, stripped of her authority and exposed as a criminal. This was my cue. I rose from my seat, walked to the stage, and placed the large official documents on the table. "The treasurer's statement is accurate," I said, my voice low but carrying the authority of certain victory. "I offer 3 non-negotiable facts." I projected the first document onto the wall, the insurance carrier's official cancellation notice. The key phrases were circled in angry red: willful negligence, breach of warranty, permanent termination. "This policy is void. Any legal action against the HOA, including the personal lawsuits I am prepared to file, will now target the personal assets of the board." I projected the second document, the Municipal Fine notice: $15,000 code violation, improper staging of Class 3 flammables. "This is the cost of saving $1,200. This penalty is paid by you, the homeowners, because your president refused to follow basic safety law." I projected the final document, the bylaws, Article 3.4. The clear language stated that any action resulting in the permanent loss of general liability coverage is an immediate and unappealable cause for the mandatory removal of the board president. The humiliation was total. The evidence was unassailable. The room no longer had to vote. The removal was mandated by the very rules Karen had weaponized for years. The noise was deafening. Demands for her resignation, accusations of fraud, and shouts of "arrest her." The final devastating blow was delivered by a long, silent board member who, seeing Karen's power dissolve, seized the moment. He stood up, grabbed the gavel, and brought it down hard. "The vote is irrelevant. Under Article 3.4, the president is immediately and automatically removed due to this breach. The motion is carried." Karen Donovan stood there, trembling, clutching the edge of the table, her face a mask of primal, defeated hatred. She was no longer the supreme commander. She was a pariah, a thief, and a massive, unprotected personal liability. The authority she had wielded with such vicious glee had been turned against her, dismantling her power structure with cold, perfect efficiency. I had won the confrontation without raising my voice, using only the paper she thought would protect her. Karen Donovan was deposed. But removal from office is merely a procedural step. It is not absolute annihilation. My objective was not just to win the vote. It was to execute a total, irreversible financial cleanup that would guarantee her personal devastation and provide the community with full restitution. I had initiated the collapse, and now I had to ensure the terminal implosion was complete and documented. The very next morning, the legal landscape shifted. With Karen removed, the remaining board members, the shell-shocked and now utterly compliant majority, led by a surprisingly competent David, were paralyzed by the fear of personal financial ruin. I had successfully weaponized their D&O liability void. They immediately reached out to me, not as a homeowner, but as the only man who understood the language of their catastrophe. I became their reluctant, unpaid risk remediation consultant. My first command was absolute. Initiate an immediate, massive civil action against Karen Donovan individually. The civil lawsuit was the ultimate cleanup tool. We weren't suing for my backyard, we were suing for the entire catastrophic financial damage she had inflicted on the association. I directed the new board's counsel to file a suit against Karen, seeking a punitive judgment for the following non-negotiable costs: full repayment of the municipal fine, the $15,000 penalty levied by the fire marshal. This was her direct, personal debt. Cost of policy void. The full premium for the D&O and general liability policy that was canceled, plus the cost of the significantly higher-priced replacement policy they now had to purchase. Legal fees and forensic audit costs, the cost of the entire operational cleanup. Punitive damages. A substantial sum to compensate for the emotional duress and the financial panic she had caused the entire community. This was not a negotiation. It was a demand for full financial incineration. The total punitive judgment sought was calculated to be a staggering six-figure amount, a figure so massive that it was designed to guarantee a judgment lien on her personal property. Her house was her final, single major asset, and I was making sure the community owned a significant, non-negotiable claim on it. The most crucial step was ensuring this devastating consequence was permanently recorded. I directed the new board to finalize the record of her removal, citing the specific policy breaches. We ensured the insurance carrier's cancellation notice, with its damning language of willful negligence and fiduciary breach, was permanently filed in the HOA's public corporate record. This action served as the ultimate blacklisting. Karen Donovan's name would be flagged in every state corporate filing and risk management database, preventing her from ever holding a position of financial trust or governance again. Her career as a community tyrant was not merely ended, it was forensically terminated. The retaliation was deadly in its precision. While the civil suit was grinding forward, I oversaw the physical remediation of my property. The new board was forced to hire a professional, insured contractor to remove the remaining, illegally staged materials and execute a full environmental soil test. The soil test confirmed minor solvent residue, validating the fire marshal's action and adding an additional, non-negotiable environmental cleanup fee, also billed directly to Karen's looming judgment. The satisfaction was rooted in the knowledge that she could not escape the consequences. She had threatened me with her rules. I responded with the laws that governed her. The new board, now operating in a state of hyper-compliance, quickly secured a new, compliant liability policy at a premium cost, a cost that would now be repaid, dollar for dollar, by the judgment against Karen. Every single aspect of her disastrous, greedy gamble had come back to financially decapitate her. Her final pathetic move was to try and defend the lawsuit, but it was useless. The evidence was absolute. The insurance carrier's file, the fire marshal's fine, the recorded board minutes, and Arthur Pinter's detailed affidavit of her illegal directives. Faced with the certainty of bankruptcy and the public disclosure of her fraud, her legal counsel advised her to enter a consent judgment. She consented to a massive, six-figure penalty. I personally tracked the final piece of paperwork to the county recorder's office, the judgment line. This document officially secured the community's claim against her primary asset. Karen Donovan was no longer an HOA president. She was a debtor, facing financial ruin at the hands of the very community she had abused. Her reign ended not with a bang, but with a relentless, cold wave of legal and financial consequences. The expert retaliation was complete. The cleanup was permanent. The system I had deployed achieved terminal operational closure. Karen Donovan's war had ended not in a debate, but in a final, devastating judgment lien filed against her personal residence. The six-figure punitive claim secured the community's financial recovery and guaranteed her total personal insolvency. She had thought a clipboard was authority. I had proven that commercial law is the only true sovereign. The days following the civil judgment were marked by the aggressive, cleansing process of restoration. The new, terrified board, now led by the hyper-vigilant David, implemented every one of my remediation commands. They secured the new compliant general liability and D&O policy, a policy that cost exponentially more thanks to Karen's high-risk antics, but which was fully funded by the judgment against her. The entire cost of her disastrous greed was now financially allocated directly to her. The ultimate measure of success was not the paperwork, but the humiliation. Karen Donovan was officially and publicly blacklisted. Her final attempt to control the narrative failed when the official judgment lien was recorded on her property deed. She couldn't sell, refinance, or escape the massive debt she owed the community. The fear she had wielded for years had rebounded with devastating precision. And now it was her turn to live under the threat of a legal seizure. I personally observed the final exquisite moment of her defeat. A for sale sign, a visible professional admission of defeat, was planted awkwardly in her once pristine front lawn. She was forced to liquidate. The home that had been the throne of her tyranny was now the ultimate collateral damage. The neighborhood intelligence network confirmed her final, humiliated departure. She executed a clandestine move, fleeing the community she had terrorized, unable to face the residents who now knew her not as Madam President, but as a convicted financial predator. This was the total victory. She was not only removed from power, she was permanently exiled and financially decimated. I had secured my primary objective, peace and security. I supervised the final environmental cleanup of my backyard, ensuring the full remediation of the solvent residue. The grass, scorched by her hazardous materials, was professionally replaced and restored. The entire cost borne by the judgment against Karen. The final morning of the ordeal was one of perfect, absolute resolution. I looked out my window at a clean, quiet, and secure backyard. The air was clear. The only sound was the distant drone of a lawnmower, operating under the safe, compliant rules of a reformed board. The neighborhood's atmosphere had shifted from toxic compliance to healthy, secure governance. The community had been restored, not by aggressive confrontation, but by precise, unforgiving legal action. I walked to my primary communication device and deleted the massive encrypted file that contained the entire archive of the HOA's corruption. The meeting minutes, the forged bylaws, the insurance reports. The technical evidence was no longer required. The battle had been won, the enemy liquidated, and the file closed forever. My friend Tom arrived with 2 fresh cups of coffee, the aroma a clean, non-hazardous counterpoint to the chemicals of the previous weeks. "So, you really executed the total dissolution of her command, didn't you?" he asked, his voice still containing a hint of awe. "I merely ensured the organization operated under the non-negotiable terms of its own commercial contract," I said, taking a sip. "The rules are only a weapon if you let them be. I just gave her the same weapon she used on others, but I attached a 6-figure personal liability trigger. I had proven the ultimate truth. A bully with a clipboard is no match for an expert armed with irrefutable documentation and the full authority of commercial law. My backyard was returned to its intended state, a secure, low-risk, private sanctuary, and the price for that recovery was paid in full by the tyrant who tried to annex it.